There are important differences in how these resident-initiated police contacts are experienced or perceived across demographic groups. So this is one of those dimensions of satisfaction with the resident-initiated contacts. We ask people, how satisfied were you with the level of compassion shown to you during your most recent resident-initiated interaction? And you can see here that non-white residents disproportionately report resident-initiated interactions with police as negative. One of the most important aspects of this project was to try to unpack why people are dissatisfied with the police and get to the bottom of that as best we could. So as we mentioned earlier, non-white residents have very different perceptions of the legitimacy of the police-initiated contacts as well as with the resident-initiated. So this is a breakdown by race. You can see that 82% of white residents in the city who'd been stopped within the last year in 2017 felt that the police had a legitimate reason for initiating the contact. Well, just 48% of black residents agreed and 70% of other non-white residents agreed. So these are statistically significant differences. So we attempted to use multivariate analysis to measure the independent impact of a lot of different demographic, socioeconomic factors, experiential factors, and trying to understand what is it that's driving dissatisfaction. And so we loaded all these things into our models, and the things that have strong independent effects in 2017 are perceptions of police contact during interactions. So how did the police treat me while I was either stopped by them or reaching out to them for help? How visible are the police in my neighborhood? And what is my race? Right? So we also asked about gender, age, household income, education, a range of other factors, right? Those things do not do a good job explaining overall satisfaction with the police. It's these three items that are structuring how people feel about the police today. So there's been an interesting change since 2014. In 2014, one of the important predictors of overall satisfaction with the police was recent victimization. Those who had been recently victimized or those who had recently experienced crimes were less likely to express satisfaction when other factors like race, gender, et cetera, were controlled. And in 2017, victimization is not predicting satisfaction with the police. So while reported exposure to crime has increased and feelings of safety have dropped, these trends have not, as of now, significantly impacted opinions of the police. Instead, individual experiences with police are structuring how people feel about the police overall. And that's an important change since 2017. Interesting. So we think that the key driver of dissatisfaction right now is perception of recent police contacts, and that this actually supersedes race. So in other words, if you want to know how a Milwaukee resident feels about the police, it's not enough to just know their race. You have to know whether or not they had recent contact with the police and how that contact went from their perspective, right? And it's the way that police contacts are distributed across racial populations that are shaping the overall pattern of satisfaction in the city. So are minorities more likely to be dissatisfied with police? Yes, they are. And we think that the reason for that is because during these interactions, they feel that the interactions are less legitimate or that they're not being shown the same level of compassion, right? Now, there are also differences among people who have had no recent contact with the police. And these differences are influenced by the perception of the aggregate experiences of others from their respective racial groups. So in other words, race can predict resident opinion among those who have not had recent police contact. Now, a really important thing here, if the question might arise, is it that people are biased against the police and that's why they're saying, I'm not satisfied with the level of compassion shown to me. This contact was illegitimate. So when we're talking about bias, we usually see bias is characterized by the failure of new information to cause people from different backgrounds to converge on the same opinion, right? So if you see the failure to converge on an opinion when you're provided new information, that's evidence of bias. We don't see that in this data. What we see is that among people who have similar experiences, recent experiences with the police, there are no differences across racial boundaries or age boundaries or gender boundaries. If you have an impact, if you have a recent interaction with the police and you are dissatisfied with that interaction, you're going to be dissatisfied with the police overall. If you are shown compassion, if you feel like the stop that the police made of you is legitimate, you are going to be much more likely to have a higher overall level of satisfaction with the police. We don't see any bias along racial lines here. People's opinions of the police seem to be reflecting their actual experiences with the police, and for those who don't have recent experiences with the police, people are looking to others like them to help structure their opinions.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is where maybe follow up by this committee is to ask the Fire and Police Commission, even on just this area, is specifically how does the Fire and Police Commission take this data and translate to changing policy? So what we're being told is that across all races, the bias shows that it's the interaction with an officer that really causes the impact in terms of their perception. So that really means, like, what are we doing to improve the communication between the law enforcement officer and the citizen? Because obviously, clearly, across all races, that interaction is not going very well. And what are they going to do about either training or new directives and how that's going to change policy? Because I think it's one of the key areas. If we want to improve community relations, it's really down to the nuts and bolts. It's about that first interaction with a police officer when they get pulled over for a speeding ticket or any other interaction. Something is not working right now. So if we need to ask and hold the Fire and Police Commission accountable, because we don't change that policy. That's their policy to change.
I would agree, Alderman.
So something that I encourage everyone to look at in the report, we talk about policy implications, but we also talk about some research into this specific topic that's out there and available. So the data suggests that an effective way to increase overall satisfaction or to address the dissatisfaction with the police is to make sure that there's an increased level of compassion shown during interactions, and that compassion is spread more equitably across different kinds of residents in our community. The data also indicates that increased police visibility would increase police satisfaction. But so I think policymakers face a difficult choice here. There's a lot of evidence in research on this topic that public servants, people in the helping professions, police officers, not only police officers, but also teachers, social workers, whose responsibilities include regular interactions with at-risk populations, they themselves are at a higher risk of experiencing trauma, which can then impact their job performance. And that risk scales with the amount of compassion they show towards those who they're serving. And so what that requires, the research says that what that requires is not just that we share coping mechanisms with police officers, but we make systemic improvements to working conditions, improve access to mental health services for police officers, and restructure shifts to reduce the net exposure to trauma. Those are the changes that the research on this topic suggests are effective. And this research is laid out in the full report with references on how policymakers can get access to it.
And I can mind if I expand on that. So, and this is across, as he said, it's across helping professions. It's not just police officers, but if you could take a related field, teachers, right? And teachers the students will have greater satisfaction with teachers who are very compassionate to them. But we all know the stories of the teachers who are very, very compassionate and go all the way out of their way for the kids, and they go every day. They're giving it their all, and then they burn out, right? And that's the difficulty of this. You can't just go out there and tell the teachers, go out there and be nicer, guys. You have to give working conditions that allow people to not be as stressed, as traumatized, as everything else. You can't just train, and just training on coping mechanisms isn't necessarily effective. You can't just say, oh, we're going to give every police officer training on coping mechanisms. Research has shown that that's just not really enough. You can't just tell someone, oh yeah, just here's how you can deal with that. You really have to change the nature of the work to reduce the amount of trauma that a person experiences in their work. And so that makes it harder from a policy perspective. You know, it's not just, we'll throw another training on the pile. It's if you really want to get to the heart. So I'll leave it at that.
How do you accomplish that?
Well, that's what we need to be talking about, yeah.
We're in a situation now, quite frankly, where we're because of financial conditions, we're reducing the number of officers. We're having officers with mandatory overtime out there continually, and you're absolutely right, you know, they're dealing with some real stressful situations, one call after another at times. And so, yeah, it's bound to impact their approach on, I don't know how we're going to accomplish that, quite frankly. We all want to accomplish it, but given the financial strains, I don't see it happening, you know, unless we can come up with, well, anyway, go ahead.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
And we can explore this more probably in a separate file, but I do think it is worth examining other police departments that have dealt successfully with this same issue, because I'm certain that we're not the first and won't be the last police department that who's had surveys that show these same statistical realities and had to think creatively and outside the box about how to help officers be able to deal more effectively with the community that they serve. And even in my own mind, I can think of a few things departmentally that that may need to be done either through the chief or through FPC that may lessen the level of stress that any one officer is exposed to on a continual and regular basis just by assignment. But I say that to say I think there is some stuff we can look at. I don't want us to leave here feeling like it's something we may not be able to solve it, but I do believe there's some things we can look at that may help to alleviate some of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I would concur completely with Alderman Cogs, and your points are well taken that, you know, we are limited in financially doing some of these options. But, for example, many years ago, we had a very active police athletic league where officers are in this central city, and it's not a confrontational relationship. It's one in which they're supporting each other. And it's less I'm here to arrest you, or less what are you doing, or why are you walking this way. It's more about trying to have a better reaction with law enforcement officers.
Through athletics, yeah.
Yeah. I have a school in my district called Banner Prep, which is really a tough school in the context. These kids have all been expelled from MPS, and they are sent to a school in my district in which this is their last best hope. And I've involved the Milwaukee Police Department to have them come into the school not as, you know, here we're to arrest you, but they have a better reaction with the kids so that the officers see the kids not as all potential future criminals, but as human beings that have come from really terrible families in many respects. And so that back to the issue of compassion, I think it's much easier for people to stereotype people based on what they see in the news or on TV. It's much different when you have an individual reaction with somebody face to face and realize, you know, they're a human being who have same problems that we all have. So I do think there should be more opportunities. We should talk to the police department about having more officers in our parts of our community in a less controversial and more of a supportive role. And I think that those things don't always have to cost money. And so then maybe it's something individually what we all could do. But I think there are lessons, I think, from this report, and we can look certainly at other cities and how they communicate it better. So I want to thank the St. Norbert and the professor. I think you did an excellent job.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Alderman.
So what's next? What do we do from this point? You know, I have some questions, you know, thinking about what the data tells us and along the lines of what Alderman Donovan said around, you know, visibility is going to be an issue, one of the solutions. We know our budgets are constrained. How do we kind of ask these questions, get more in depth, and get into the weeds of what the police department's going to do, Fire and Police Commission, how we support this as community or council?
So we're not limited in what we can do. I think Alderman Murphy set the tone at the beginning that the report means nothing if we as policymakers and if FPC doesn't and the police department doesn't do something with the results. It is my intention to do an additional file that calls forward the FPC and MPD to speak to how they're taking the results of this to introduce it into whether it's policy changes, directives, or what the chief may be doing with these things as well, and to ask any further specific questions. Additionally, because of the exchange we just had, it's my intention to ask LRB for research on other cities and what their police departments have done to address both the compassion issue as well as creative community ways for officers to have contact with the community that's not about arresting and searching people. So that's what I intend to do, and that will come before you all at this committee. But I think that we're not limited, and I think that we each should take a good look at the full report and think of ways that we can make this report matter and make the results of it count for citizens, so that, if we do this again 3 years from now, we're not talking worse numbers, we're talking better numbers.